Today we are joined by Leslie, who is the Senior Coordinator of FoodShare Toronto. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, Leslie. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. So for the people listening at home, can you talk a little bit about what FoodShare is as an organization?
Sure. FoodShare Toronto is a citywide food security organization. Our mandate has us working alongside individuals and families and communities to promote good food for all. We do this work and it shows up in a number of ways that include things like supporting 50 over 50 community-led produce markets across the city, supporting student nutrition and food literacy programming, managing urban agriculture projects, and partnering with over 80 organizations at the onset of the pandemic to provide boxes filled with fresh produce to help folks get through what was a growing crisis. So it shows up in different ways, but our mandate is around access to good, healthy food.
That's awesome. So how long has FoodShare been running?
We have been running now for upwards of 35 years since 1985.
Mm-hmm. And so I saw on your website that FoodShare does a lot to take part in activism causes. So can you talk a little bit about that and what causes you support and how you do so?
Sure. FoodShare's mission is one of good food for all. So that means that our work is towards realizing the right to food in Canada. And essentially, we are a food justice organization. And so this means that we recognize the fact that in many places, the most important barrier that people face in accessing the food that they need is a lack of money. Therefore, in order to address food insecurity, we must also name and dismantle those systemic oppressions that hold poverty and food insecurity in place. These are things like capitalism, white supremacy, colonialism, systemic racism, and patriarchy. And so we support causes, organizations, and work that aligns with food justice and with dismantling sites of oppression in the food system.
So ever since the BLM movement has kind of risen in the past couple of months, how has the workload been different for you and for everyone working at FoodShare? Have you been doing more to be part of the BLM movement?
FoodShare works to try to align its resources and to support groups that are facing the greatest barriers to accessing the food that they need and also the money that they need for food. In recognition of the fact that Black communities face greater barriers in accessing the money that they need for food and are also overrepresented in food insecurity statistics, then FoodShare has worked to kind of align its resources with organizations that are serving Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities as well.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking later a little bit more about how food insecurity targets marginalized communities and POC communities. However, let's talk more about FoodShare and how they do the work that they do. So I first heard of you guys back in June 19th. When those who protested at the sit-in for Not Another Black Life were offered free food boxes to show their support. So does FoodShare offer a lot of free boxes for individuals?
So since the onset of the pandemic, then FoodShare has really kind of ramped up its emergency good food box support in recognition of the fact that people are facing acute food shortages and need food in their pantries, and that it's an emergency response. Most of our programming is set up in a way that is working towards more long-term solutions to food insecurity. Because we recognize that a food box may feed you for the day or the week, but if you're looking to solve poverty, then the solutions are going to look very different. They're going to be much more income focused and income based solutions. So much of our work is really focused on kind of challenging this idea that's kind of feeding folks for the day is the answer to hunger, and that the solutions are actually much more long term in nature. And so in recognizing that, especially as kind of conversations that are really kind of focused on the structural oppressions that are faced by Black communities in Canada, then yeah, standing in solidarity with these groups, especially given that we are a Black-led organization ourselves, and that we kind of work to mirror and model the sort of change making that we feel is being called for by the Black community right now.
Awesome. So I'm sure with all of these free food boxes that you have been giving out, how does FoodShare provide the funding in order to be able to provide this kind of support?
So our funding comes from a variety of sources. We get some funding from individual donations. We have some large grant funding as well. And so all of that helps to contribute towards our food box program. In addition, we also have a social enterprise component of the food box program. Through the social enterprise system, then the boxes are distributed at an affordable price that gains FoodShare a small amount of profit. And this profit also helps to support funding for things like the emergency good food box and other elements of our programming.
Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about what is in the food boxes themselves?
Sure. Food boxes can come in a variety of sizes. You can get a small or a large. A small box, I believe, is expected to feed a family of 4 for about a week. Again, supplementing their fruit and vegetable income, or fruit and vegetable buying patterns. The box is full of, yeah, it depends on the season, but everything from kale and tomatoes to culturally appropriate produce like okra and callaloo. We really kind of strive to reflect the incredible diversity present in our city through the boxes that we're distributing.
Mm-hmm. So everything's super healthy for everyone.
Everything is super fresh. Everything is super fresh. Yeah, I mean, I think that there has historically been a tendency to assume that if you need to rely on some sort of a food assistance program or are visiting a food bank or food pantry, then providing leftover food from a grocery store or diverted waste food from restaurant waste cycles or that sort of thing has kind of been held up as one solution. But it's something that we at FoodShare try to push back on, because we feel that access to food with dignity is really important, and that everyone has the right to access good, healthy food. And so all of the food that we distribute is food that we purchase fresh, much of it from local producers, and we also source a lot of our food through the Ontario Food Terminal. But it's really, really central to our model to be kind of providing food access with dignity.
That's awesome. So with a lot of homeless shelters and food banks, like you said, that are giving out sort of, for lack of a better word, leftovers from grocery stores, is FoodShare doing anything to directly help out these food banks and homeless shelters?
So I think that in working to kind of address issues of recirculation of leftover food, we really try to model what an alternative system could look like. Mm-hmm. So there is no kind of recycled or upcycled food in FoodShare's programming that we provide. And yeah, we encourage others and kind of advocate for greater consideration of this dignity piece, so that's kind of the food that is being provided through food pantries and food banks contains as much fresh, healthy, good food as possible.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other partnerships with other organizations that help uphold FoodShare's cause?
Sure. We partner with currently we have partnerships with well over 80 organizations across the city. We partner with a lot and also really try to align our resources with organizations that are led by folks within the food system who are themselves facing barriers to food access or have experience dealing with poverty and that sort of thing. Really trying to kind of recognize the fact that the power and leadership of community is really important in ensuring that programming that is set up to address issues of food insecurity is aligned with the realities of the people who are experiencing food insecurity. And so as a result, some of our major partnerships are with groups like the Black Creek Community Farm, groups like African Food Basket in the city of Toronto, groups like the Birchmount Community Action Council and the Thorncliffe Park Women's Committee, and kind of other grassroots community-led organizing that often kind of gets lost in the scramble for funding or in when institutions are looking for organizations to champion or to work alongside.
So I'm sure all of that requires a lot of work from you guys. So can you tell us a little bit about all the different teams that come together in order to uphold FoodShare?
Sure. We have a number of different teams. I mentioned our social enterprise team a little bit earlier, but we also have a community food growing team. We have a community food programs team, as well as a community action support program team, in addition to our student nutrition program team.
So can you talk a little bit more about what each of those teams do?
Sure. Our social enterprise team works on good food box distribution and other kind of social enterprise initiatives within the organization. We sell things like honey that is produced at hives from within the city. We recently started selling hot sauce that was produced through a partnership with the Black Creek Community Farm. And so other sorts of kind of revenue generating initiatives are housed there. Our community food growing team runs much of our growing operations across the city. We support numerous community gardens across the city and also run our own farming operations in both kind of East Toronto and West Toronto, producing food both for local communities and for distribution through our Good Food Box program. The community food growing team also supports composting activities and community composting work. Our community food programs team is all about food literacy and working with youth to really kind of build understanding of food and food justice issues, and also to really kind of build a love for and appreciation of good food in young students, really focusing on food literacy. And our community action support program is where we have our partnerships platform where we will form partnerships with other groups, other grassroots, often BIPOC-led and BIPOC-serving groups working in the city of Toronto to kind of help these groups grow and build out things like improving governance capacity and that sort of thing. Basically, building capacity within other groups outside of FoodShare. And our student nutrition program has also operated citywide for years, providing fresh meals to over 200,000 students in the city of Toronto every day from September through June. Now, with all of these teams, our activities have been disrupted as a result of COVID-19 and the workplace shifts that have taken place as a result of that. But yeah, that's sort of a broad overview of the work that we're engaged in.
And speaking of shifts, how have you seen the teams and the level of support and funds and resources of FoodShare grow over the years, or at least in your time with FoodShare?
Great question. So, I mean, I have only been at FoodShare for a little over a year now. So, I mean, I have not had a ton of time to observe shifts and changes. I think that you asked, I guess, about team size.
Yeah, or
Team size, we generally determine team size based on the activities of the projects that we happen to be involved in or supporting at the time. And those really change over time. And so, yeah, that kind of depends on the activities that we're involved in. But in terms of thinking about resources, I think that recently we've seen a bit of an uptick in support for Black-led organizations. FoodShare happens to have a Black executive director. But we really, despite the fact that there has been this recent uptick in support, we really remain focused on long-term issues. And I mean, what's needed is for this recent uptick to extend indefinitely in recognition of the fact that there are lots of Black-led and Black-serving organizations out there that have historically struggled to access the same levels of funding that white-led organizations access. And I guess additionally, yeah, this recent uptick in funding doesn't really erase the fact that Black initiatives have historically been underfunded. And so that also is an issue that needs to be addressed.
Mhm. So how do you think we can address the issue just by highlighting that there is a need for more funding for these types of organizations? What more steps can we take?
I think having funders like take their lead in response to what they're hearing from Black-led initiatives and the Black community in general is a great first step. I don't know that Leslie Campbell, the individual, is necessarily in a position to answer that question. I think that because the people who've historically controlled who has access to what funding flows have tended to look fairly similar. They've tended to be people who are white. They've tended to be people who are upper middle class. They've tended to be people who are straight and cisgendered. And so as a result, I think that this is a question for them. Like, what are you going to do to address the fact that historically many groups led by marginalized folks have not had the same levels of access to resources as white-led groups? So yeah, I would turn that question around to ask, yeah, the folks who are holding the purse strings as opposed to community-led organizations.
That's a very, very good point. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about you and your journey within FoodShare. So how did you come to join the team in the first place?
So my background is in international developments and environmental science.
Mm-hmm.
Much of my previous work was working internationally on food security and community development projects in different countries. And this work was really important to me. But I noticed that as I observed the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement and greater kind of conversations in organizing spaces back home here in Canada about race issues, I felt cut off from those conversations working internationally. Although I was doing work that was very close to my heart, I wasn't able to engage in the same sorts of activism for the Black community here in Canada in the way that I might have liked. And so I returned to Canada in 2017, really excited to get involved in community work domestically. And I kind of come to this work and this space now from that perspective of a grower and an organizer. And so, yeah, I don't really have a clear pathway that brought me to my work at FoodShare, but I think that in existing in the growing space in Toronto and also having a deep interest and belief in kind of social justice issues and equity issues, then working with FoodShare kind of made sense in many ways because the work that is taking place here really aligns with my values.
Mhm. So would you say that you've been involved or interested in activism for a very long time now?
Not formally. My degree in international development and experience in international food security exposed me to things like the struggle for justice and human rights internationally. I remember doing things like fundraising and going on walks in support of children in northern Uganda, or dancing around in front of the campus Tim Hortons to try to convince them to adopt a fair trade purchasing policy. which they didn't end up adopting. But what I was doing wasn't super connected. It was activism, but it wasn't super connected to the issues affecting people in Canada. And so my understanding of that struggle in Canada and the ways that it manifests in activism here is really something that I'm still new to and learning lots about.
Well, for a lot of people, when they think activism, they usually think protests and rallies out in the streets, right? They don't normally think about food delivery, which I would argue, I think, is a form of activism, as you and FoodShare is supporting communities that suffer through systematic oppression and racism. So I want to ask if you can, sorry. So I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about the link between systematic oppression and food access and racial tensions in general.
That's a huge question.
Let me narrow it down for you then. So how are Black people or people of color or people within marginalized communities, how are they more tied to food insecurity?
So yeah, that is a huge question, but also a great question. This is also a question that I think we at FoodShare have for a long time been asking ourselves as well. Over the 35 years that we've been running food programming in different ways, then we have often noticed disproportionately high numbers of Black, Indigenous, and other racialized folks accessing our food programming. So we had these observations, but we didn't really for a long time have data to back this up. And so in 2019, to address this question, then we had the opportunity to partner on some groundbreaking research that looked for the first time at food insecurity through the lens of race, using the Canadian Community Health Survey. And the research specifically compared Black and white communities in Canada in terms of their risk of and vulnerability to food insecurity. We wanted to know what is the difference in food insecurity risk between Black and white households in Canada. And we found, as a result of this study, that, for example, Black households in Canada are more than 3.5 times more likely to be food insecure than white households. We found that 37% of Black children living in food insecure households in Canada compared with only 12% of white children. We found that 28% of Black households are food insecure compared with only 10% of white households. The research also showed that if you look at Canada as a whole, then owning a home generally means that you are less likely to be food insecure. This is also true if you only look at white households. We found that this was not true for Black households. We found that Black folks who own their home are in fact at the same risk of food insecurity as white folks who rent their homes. And it's really difficult to understand these sorts of findings as anything other than the manifestation of structural racism in Canada. This means that Black communities face greater barriers than white communities in accessing the money that they need for food, and therefore are more likely to be food insecure, because we know that the main roots of food insecurity are caused by a lack of access to money.
And so how has having access to this research helped you or FoodShare?
So, I mean, I think that one thing that access to this sort of data helps with is it's validating. Like I was mentioning that these are observations, like when this research was released, no one in the Black community is shocked and surprised to see these findings, because these are things that folks from within the Black community have been talking about forever. But now there simply happens to be some numbers to reinforce what people have been saying for a very, very long time. And so, I mean, that's helpful insofar as, first, we have specific numbers that we're able to use and that we're also able to provide to other Black-led organizations and community groups within the Black communities, so that others can also use these statistics when advocating for change within the Black community. I also think that it helps to kind of hone the direction of the advocacy that we're trying to do when we're able to sort of hold up statistics like this as we kind of push for a better understanding that you can't really talk about food or food access or food justice without also talking about race and racism. The two are really inextricably linked. And it's research like this that helps to really kind of clarify that picture of how they're linked.
Thank you so much for all of your input, Leslie. To the Regent Park community, thank you for tuning in. And as we bring more and more perspectives to the show, I hope that we realize not only how large this issue is, but how interconnected it all is. By aiding one problem, we are only pushing for a better society overall. So as Leslie said, if you would like to look more into FoodShare and all of the ways that you can support them, you can visit them at foodshare.net. As of right now, stay tuned. There's more to come.
Please do not forget to like, comment, and share to our channel. Follow us on all our social media platforms. And for more information, please check out our website.